and the opportunity to do whatever learning you'd like to do to be able to do the work of this subcommittee, which means we've got to understand what that work is. And that's what today's conversation is really about. Today, I want everybody to take a breath and relax. Today's going to be pretty informal. What we want to do is really lay out the charge that's been given to us, the scope of work that this subcommittee is undertaking. We'll also share a little bit more about what's going on more broadly with the full task force. And then we want everybody on this subcommittee to get to know one another and to really break some ice and start to lay the foundation of how we're all going to work together. So what I'd like to do, I know we're going to be joined by some folks from the state in the next few minutes, but rather than wait on that, what I'd like to do is just dive into some introductions. And we are going to spend a lot of time today talking about what your aspirations are for your time together with this group, what you hope will be the outcome when we get this right. And you'll hear me say when, not if, because I'm convinced we are going to get this right. We need to. And we're going to talk about what you're bringing to this conversation, where you enter it. But to start with, what I'd like to do is just lay out some basic standards of how we're going to function from a technical perspective, to make sure all of these conversations are really as accessible as possible to all members of this subcommittee and the public who may be watching later. And these are recorded so that we can share them with the public. We're going to ask people not to use the chat. For people using a screen reader or other assistive technology, it can become really distracting. I'll also ask that anytime you speak, you share at least your first name so people know who's talking. And other than that, we're just going to really ask everybody to function in our time together with an assumption of good faith, that we're going to ask you to, frankly, disagree without being disagreeable. We need to make sure that we get all of this right. There's some big stakes and some big opportunities for Colorado to continue what we've done nationally on so many topics, and that is to lead. So we're really going to be leaning on this group to work collaboratively, which means we are going to ask everybody to assume the best intentions when you hear from somebody who you disagree with, and to spend your time listening rather than preparing your response, and assume that everybody else has those same good intentions. But before I go further and start into the substance and the introductions, it's always my pleasure to introduce our Lieutenant Governor, Diane Primavera, to give some welcoming remarks to everybody.
Well, good morning and thank you. I'm on my cell phone, even though I'm at home, because my Zoom is doing updates or something like that. So technology is great when it works. So I just want to say good morning to everybody. And as he mentioned, I'm Lieutenant Governor Diane Primavera, and I have the honor of chairing the task force on the rights of Coloradoans with disabilities. I have a long history in the disability community, starting probably when I was 16, and I won't tell you how many decades that means for me in the disability community. But we believe that access to the Colorado outdoors is important for everyone, whether it's for relaxation, exercise, or recreation. Time in Colorado's beautiful outdoors helps improve both physical and mental health. So I know, as it was already mentioned, that we will be both I know there will be both areas where everyone on this subcommittee agrees, as we've heard, and areas where there is disagreement. So as you've already been asked, just be civil to one another and honor each other's points of view. Your work couldn't be more important. So while the task force will be getting updates, my staff will be joining most of your meetings and keeping me updated on all of your progress as well, so that I can chair the entire task force. So I just want to thank you again for committing to this important work. I know it's time consuming. The other members of the task force and I look forward to the recommendations coming out of this subcommittee, as well as the other 3 subcommittees that are working on this really important issue. So you'll be sending those to us within the next 13 months. So again, thank you for your time and commitment. And I don't know, since I was having Zoom difficulties, if we've had everybody introduce themselves, but could I meet people on the task force just briefly, their name and why they're there? And I probably know a lot of people anyway.
Absolutely, ma'am, and that's exactly where we're going to go next. So with the LG's prompt, I'm going to take us in that direction. And in our next conversation, we're going to get really into your aspirations and your hopes, your concerns and your ideas for this. But to start with, I'm just going to ask you to introduce yourself by your name. If you're representing an organization or a constituency, feel free to share that. And then we'll come back around. And also, if you've got a preferred name that's different from what may appear on your Zoom screen, or if you have preferred pronouns that you'd like to share, completely leave that open to you. But let's just go around the room. And I'm going to first ask my colleague, Carrie, to introduce herself. And then I'll go to Kurt and then Christina.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Carrie Steele. I'm the Policy Director and Project Manager here at Confluence. I will be, if you see me turning my head, it's not because I'm ignoring you. I'm taking notes on a separate screen throughout our meetings. So when it comes to contact and notes and materials and everything, I will be your point person. If you need to get in touch with me, feel free to email, text, or call. My numbers are in my signature line on my email. So if you have anything that comes up or questions you need clarifying, please feel free to reach out. I look forward to working with all of you over the next year or so.
Thank you, Carrie. And Curtis, although I believe it's Kurt, but I'll let you set the record on that.
You are correct. I do go by Kurt. I introduce myself as Curtis a lot, so I don't get the Kurt, Kyle, can't things. But anyway, my name's Kurt Garrett. I work for Atlantis Community Center for Independent Living, serve 7 counties in the metro area. Let's see, I got to remember all the things you asked. I don't know if I'm fully awake yet this morning, but I'm a native Coloradan, 3rd generation. I worked for Denver Parks and Recreation actually for 27 years previous to working for Atlantis. So recreation and the importance of the health benefits, mental, physical, social, all those things that recreation does for you and being outdoors in Colorado. I know there's a lot of issues and a lot of people that don't necessarily get the opportunity to visit a lot of our outdoor parks. So I want to make sure that we make that possible for everyone.
Thanks,
and
Kurt.
did I forget anything?
No, that's good. For this one, it's kind of the high level. And then on the next round, I'm really going to ask you to lean into what it is that you're hoping we get done and why you're leaning into this. But for now, Christina and then Madison, who you are and what group or perspective or organization you represent, if any.
Yeah, good morning, everyone. My name is Christina Erickson. I am a social worker and accessibility specialist. I work for the City and County of Denver in our Division of Disability Rights. And I'm also a director for a very small nonprofit called the Adaptive Climbers Festival, which is very, very fun. And that work brought me here. And I'm also the daughter of disabled mountain athletes. So here for personal reasons as well. I'm stoked to be here.
Thanks, Christina. Madison and then Sharon.
Hi, good morning, everyone. Madison Murphy. My pronouns are she, her, hers. I am the Chief Operating Officer at the Colorado Department of Labor and Employment. And I'm here today both to represent the Department of Labor and Employment, but also because I'm a former ski instructor and I also worked with adaptive ski sports whenever I lived over on the Western Slope. So I'm really excited to get moving with this group.
Thanks, Madison. Sharon and then John, please.
Hi, my name is Sharon Campbell. I'm here to hopefully provide some lived experience. I've had a spinal cord injury as a quadriplegic for going on 10 years next month. I've also had the unique experience of going from a quadriplegic, utilizing a power chair, manual chair, forearm walker, and then now I utilize forearm crutches to get around. So I have a lot of different perspectives on disability and getting around and what's accessible at different stages. And so it's a lot of personal reasons, and hopefully that's valuable to some of you.
John and then Melanie, please.
Hi, I'm John Broadbent. I'm an attorney in Denver, representing those with disabilities. The statute is more specific about what I'm representing. But anyway, I come to this with a background in law, but also personally, I've overcome a lot of disabilities in my own life, and a significant portion of that story has been shaped by my experience in the outdoors. I grew up as an adaptive ski user, and now I can ski black diamond and hike 14, and all of the things that Colorado has to offer. I want to make sure that as many people as possible have that opportunity as well.
Wonderful. Thank you, John. I'm going to go to Melanie and then Jen.
Hi, everyone. Good morning. My name is Melanie Mills. I'm the president and CEO of Colorado Ski Country USA, and we represent 21 Colorado ski areas, basically all the ones that are not owned by Vail Resorts. I have been in the ski industry for 30 years and have worked quite a bit with the United States Forest Service and other entities on our work at ski areas with adaptive athletes and adaptive guests. And I'm an avid outdoors person, struggling this winter, having just had shoulder surgery. I'm not going to be on the snow much this winter. So this group of outdoor enthusiasts will be my outlet, I think. But I look forward to getting to know everybody and working together.
Wonderful. Thank you. I'm going to go to Jen and then Connor.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Jen Mendenhall, and I live on the Western Slope in Grand Junction. And currently, though, I'm in the Children's Hospital here in Denver with my daughter. So wanted to give you a heads up about that I may be in and out and talking to nurses and doctors here this morning. So I'll try to be respectful with my mute and video button as we're going through that this morning. My daughter Cody is 17 years old. She had cerebral palsy and epilepsy, and she is an outdoor athlete of any type that you can think about, from zip lining to bi-skiing, to rafting, to we have a tandem e-trike that we love to ride everywhere. She loves to swim. We've skied at various resorts throughout Colorado. I have a background in natural resource recreation and tourism and have worked for ski areas and other parks and recreation entities throughout the state and Alaska. I'm also a parent member of the Governor's State Rehabilitation Council, so I work a lot with employment for those with disabilities. So but outdoor education and outdoor recreation is my passion. So especially for her, I wanted to be able to share the out of doors in Colorado with her, even with a disability, and how we can make that more accessible for everyone as we go through this process. So thank you. And again, I apologize for any distractions this morning.
Thank you very much, Jen. And please don't ever feel the need to apologize. We're grateful for your participation. Connor, are you in a place where you can join to say hello?
Yes, thank you so much. And really wonderful to be with all of you this morning. I'm so sorry I'm not on video. I'm driving up to Breckenridge for a work expedition with a bunch of higher education leaders in the OREC space to actually talk about how we diversify and provide more equitable access in higher education. So feels like really well aligned with this subcommittee and the mission. I am Connor Hall. I lead Colorado's Office of Outdoor Recreation and Industry within Colorado's broader agency of economic development and international trade. And we serve as kind of a central steward for this, really important lifeblood industry of the state. And one of our major focuses is trying to provide more equitable access to the outdoor experience and break down any barriers that exist. And we do that through a number of different ways that I assume we'll get into. But it's both a professional focus, but also a real personal passion. I was really lucky to grow up with really good access in the San Luis Valley of Colorado and know how much it meant in my development. And so just want to try to break down any barrier of access that should be a right and not a privilege. So really honored to be on this panel and excited to get to know all of you all.
Wonderful. Thank you, Connor. And I think that covers all of our subcommittee members. For any members of the public who are joining or are listening to this later and want to join a future meeting, we will be reserving time at the end of each meeting. Today at about 8:50 a.m., we'll reserve time for public comment. That comment is, frankly, a one-direction thing. It's not intended to be an opportunity to engage in an in-depth back and forth, but we will provide opportunities for that in the future. One thing I'm going to do today that will not be my norm is we also have a number of other folks from the state who are on. I want to at least acknowledge them, and I will give them the opportunity, though I'm not going to put them on the spot necessarily, if they'd like to say hello. Charlie, I don't know if you'd like to say hello, or Katie, I think I saw you on.
Yeah, this is Charlie real quick. Charlie Garcia, I'm an attorney and a member of the Colorado Civil Rights Commission. Been on for 6 years, and I am the current commission's subject matter expert assigned to the entire task force. So I guess I'm here if you have questions as to anything you're doing and how it relates to the commission itself. Thank you.
Thanks, Charlie. And I won't put on the spot, but you'll probably see Josh Winkler on the screen, or at least his name. He is a senior policy advisor with the Lieutenant Governor, specifically on issues of disability rights and access. So Josh is going to be listening in, though not usually participating, but he is a big supporter and advocate for the work of this task force and certainly of this subcommittee. I see a couple of other phone numbers, and folks, I think that's general public joining in, so I'm not going to stop there. Our general ask during these meetings is going to be that if you're a member of the subcommittee and you're in a place where it's safe and comfortable to do so, that you have your camera on so folks can see you. Understanding life does not always cooperate with that, so it's not a steadfast rule. And on the other side, if you're a member of the public who is just joining to listen and hanging out to maybe make some public comment later, we'd ask that you do keep yourself on mute and your camera off, just so the members of the subcommittee can really focus on the conversations with one another. What I'd like to do next is just cover in statute what it is that we're required to address. And then we're going to get into more of an aspirational conversation about what everybody hopes we can accomplish and what it looks like when we do. Following that, we're going to get into a little bit more brainstorming on some of the pieces that you think are important for us to cover. Today is by no means going to close the door on that, but we want to start really putting your ideas on the table in terms of the full scope of issues you'd like to explore. And as part of that, we'll talk about what it is that we're going to need to learn in order to support that. But I want to read directly from the statute what we are charged as a subcommittee with doing. And it says that the purpose of the subcommittee on basic access to Colorado's outdoors for persons with disabilities is to identify barriers to basic access to and the enjoyment of the Colorado outdoors for persons with disabilities, and to make recommendations for addressing those barriers. In terms of what we're going to be generating in the months and the year ahead, the subcommittee shall submit a report with its findings and recommendations, including recommendations on best practices and guidance for creating basic access to Colorado outdoor spaces for people with disabilities to the task force on or before December 1st, 2024. Now, I know sitting here in December of 2023, that seems an awful long ways away, and maybe, well, we can take it slow. From my experience doing work like this, that time is going to pass more quickly than we think. We really want to spend our first 6 months with all of you doing the learning and identifying the topics, and whether that's bringing in experts, bringing in more voices with different lived experience, or digging really deeply into how other states or other jurisdictions have approached some of this and brainstorming on some of the solutions. And then the back half of our work together next year will be really digging into what are those recommendations. And when we think about recommendations, I want us to think as broadly as possible. I think there's a tendency for us to jump to the conclusion that we need to change law. And that means legislation and some bill in the legislature. And that certainly may be part of your solution. But I'll also leave open to all of us that the solutions may range from regulations or rulemaking that happen short of the legislative process. It may be best practices. It may be new programs. It may be new partnerships that you all are going to recommend. So when we talk about the challenges we're trying to solve for, I want us to think solutions and recommendations in the broadest sense. I do also want to be transparent about what the process is here. We as a subcommittee are going to come to some agreement across this meeting and the next meeting about how we're going to work together to vote on things or to advance recommendations, whether we're going to require a majority or a supermajority. What are we going to do when we don't all agree? Certainly my goal and our team's goal as facilitators is to get to the point where we have recommendations that everybody believes are the best solution, that people are somewhere between, I can live with it and I love it, but I recognize in these things we don't always get to that. So part of what we'll also discuss is what do we do when it's just 51% that believe one thing and the rest are leaning somewhere else? And how do we pass both views? Our role, we don't have decision-making power. We haven't been given the authority to pass legislation or even to call for the introduction of legislation. We'll make recommendations to the full task force. They will assess that along with those of all of the other subcommittees, which I'll touch on in just a second, and they will then put forward their recommendations. I think folks are aware there's a few subcommittees under this task force, but I'll touch on them briefly. One has to do with the rewrite of CADA, which is Colorado's Anti-Discrimination Act. It parallels in many ways the Americans with Disabilities Act, the ADA, which is now 30 plus years old. So we've got a subcommittee that is strictly looking at Colorado's laws relating to the rights of disabilities and where that needs to have some rewrite. There's another subcommittee that's looking at housing and basic access to and affordability for housing related to the disabilities community. And finally, there's one on basic access to government services and private services. So they're all four subcommittees are going to be making their recommendations to the task force. They're meeting in parallel. And one of the things that we'll endeavor to do is make sure you all are updated on what's going on across all of those. Sometimes there's going to be a bit of intersection. Sometimes I think it'll just be informative to know these different parallel streams, all in pursuit of the same vision. But the other thing I want to cover before I start our next conversation about aspirationally where we want to go, when I was reading that definition, you heard me throw around things like basic access. I'm going to throw out two representative definitions. These are not what we are bound by, but I want to start grounding us in some common shared language around things like ableism and basic access. So I'm going to read two definitions, and as we go forward in our work together over the next year, we're going to continue to mull these over and where it fits with our work and where we want to make some recommendations. But at the most basic level, ableism is the discrimination and social prejudice against people with disabilities based on a belief that typical abilities are superior. At its heart, ableism is rooted in the assumption that disabled people require fixing and defines people by their disability. I also want to talk briefly about basic access, and then I'm going to open it up to reactions to either of these terms I'm sharing. Basic access or basic accessibility, which is integral to our work together, constitute public safety issues and mean the general practice of making information, activities, and environments sensible, meaningful, usable, and safe for as many people as possible. So I'm going to pause there, and unlike other conversations where I will go around the room and call on folks, this one I'm going to invite anybody who would like to raise their hand and lean in, and anybody who just wants to listen, absolutely fine. But I would welcome your response to either of those definitions. How do they feel for you? And how you incorporate those into your thought processes about the work that we're undertaking. Is there anybody who would like to jump in? And I know it's early and I'm throwing unprompted pop quizzes at people. All right, I will always give us a few seconds of awkward silence before it gets really uncomfortable. I'm not going to force a conversation. We'll share those around, and they were in the agenda you should have received. We'll circle back on this in our next conversation because I think it's really important for us to have a shared vision of what we mean by these different terms as we're working towards these recommendations to improve basic access. My next question, I am going to call on people, and I will give a heads up. It'll probably be in approximate reverse order, although as you pop on or off screen, it means you move around on my screen. But I'll give a heads up that initially I'm going to go to Connor and then Jen. And my question is this. Colorado is coming up on a big anniversary in 2026. It will be our sesquicentennial, which we're all going to have to learn to pronounce over the next 18 months or so. But it's a big marker for Colorado. And my question to all of you, we're going to be publishing some recommendations in December of 2024. Where we're going to be asking for changes in law or changes in the state's behavior, we expect that to happen in 2025. So my question for you, when we get this right, and again, it's when, not if, when we get this right, what looks different in Colorado as we strike our sesquicentennial in 2 years? What has fundamentally changed, and what is the experience of people with disabilities seeking to enjoy the outdoors here in Colorado when we get this right and we're able to affect both the system level change and the thought changes we need across the sectors in Colorado? And Connor, I'll go to you, and then Jen, what does it look like when we get this right and people act on the recommendations of this group?
Yeah, thanks for that, Barrett. I mean, I'll be brief. I think, you know, in 2 years, and I've been involved in a number of different boards and subcommittees, and I think this is a really, just from hearing everyone's introduction, even a really strong group to make real, hopefully tangible progress on this important issue. I think I also, I'm realistic that, we are not going to completely solve all equitable access and general basic access issues in 2 years. I think what I would like to see is, real tangible progress, good ideas that can turn into law, that can make that access easier, not only easier, but, more widespread across all forms of, really all different groups, but especially for this group, all, disabled populations. And, more, and also normalize that, it's, we have such incredible adaptive athletes in Colorado. I think we're one of the leaders in the capitals of adaptive outdoor recreation. And it's, incredible stories, incredible athletic feats, and lifting that up too. I'm so incredibly proud that Colorado leads so much in that space, and not that there's not more work to do, but I'm just lifting that up too and into the broader outdoor recreation conversation. The outdoors is really, I would guess, the reason that all of us are here in Colorado. All of us love this state, and so that access has to be, open to all. So I'm excited to really make some tangible progress. I'm excited to see what that looks like and shape that with this group.
Thank you, Connor. Really appreciate that aspirational view. I'm going to go to Jen, and I want to acknowledge, something that Connor said. If my question implied we're going to have it all perfect in 2 years, that's certainly not my intention. Want to invite people to share what is that foundation that we've laid as a result of our recommendations and work together, and what world is it laying out that we're going to be building towards? I'll go to Jen and then Melanie.
Hi, this is Jen. I think I want to give an example of how I hope things are different. My daughter is a power wheelchair user, and she also has what's called a grit chair, which is meant to go off-road. It has big tires, and she uses levers to push herself. And there's almost a fear of sometimes taking her onto certain trails because of the perception of those people that we will run into because it's mechanized. And so my hope would be in the future that we provide a different perception, some education to be able to give to other Coloradoans to realize that there's different ways to experience the outdoors. And even though the Wilderness Act and other acts say, mechanized, motorized, I know those are very important terms and some things that we need to hold on to, but a mechanized wheelchair is the only way that my daughter can experience some of those things. And people get mad about that. And I understand it. When I was in college, I was a purist. It was like, what? Mountain bikes in a wilderness area? Forget that. Motors on a boat? No way. But now I see things differently. And I hope that maybe we can shift that perception with others as well to be more accepting and understanding and wanting to embrace that change to share with others with disabilities.
Thank you, Jen. I'm going to invite Melanie and then John to offer thoughts on what framework and what kind of conditions do you believe will have changed, and what's the new paradigm that we will be defining when this group gets our recommendations right and the state moves those forward.
Thanks, Barrick. You just made the question a lot more complicated.
Feel free to go with the easier version and I'll make it complicated for you later.
Well, I had made a couple of notes on this early on, and you know, borrowing threads that both Jen and Connor identified. First of all, I hope as a group that we can come together and recommend good policy, good, clear policy, because it'll have such incredible weight and force coming from this group of folks. I also want to, along the lines of Connor's caution that we not think we're going to solve every issue here. I'd really love to see us identify where is the low-hanging fruit where we're not doing the job that we should be doing today, and have some concrete things to show or recommendations to make very specific improvements to those things. And then I also loved Jen's comment about raising the consciousness and the perception of the public, both our residents and our visitors here, about how much people with disabilities using different sorts of adaptive equipment and approaches can and enjoy our outdoors and have just as much right to it as anyone.
Thank you, Melanie. I'm going to go to John next and then to Sharon. John, your thoughts when we get this right. How do things look differently in Colorado in a couple of years?
Well, I want to echo a lot of what my colleagues have said already. Add to that the idea of the biggest thing that I can see us having an impact on is sort of reducing the stigma around people accessing the outdoors and using the outdoors in a way that, in the same way that others do. The perception that people with disabilities are less than able to access the outdoors needs to change, and I believe that Colorado is very well positioned to provide that example to other states. So that's where I want to be the most substantial improvement. There are obviously other low-hanging fruit that Melanie referenced that we should address as well. But just the cultural milieu around people with disabilities using the outdoors, if we can have an impact on that, I think that we will have done a good job.
I love that. Thank you, John. And I have to say, somehow, John and Melanie, it feels like you have snuck a peek at my internal agenda, because some of what you're raising is where we're going to go next. In a few minutes, we're going to talk about misperceptions. We're going to talk about the big challenges, and then we're going to talk about what might be some of the easier things that we could move forward, and what are the things that are going to be big tasks for us to move, but we're going to need to commit to doing so. For now, I want to continue this conversation on how have we changed what it looks like in Colorado for adaptive athletes or persons with disabilities enjoying the outdoors. And I'll go to Sharon and then Madison.
And when you say how have we changed, is that over the years or is it recent?
I'm sorry. When this group puts forward our recommendations, if we convince the state and locals and our partners in the private sector to all work with us on these recommendations, what will we be able to change? And what will that new paradigm and new reality look like?
For me, hopefully it changes some of the policies at resorts, trails in the mountains. I mean, Colorado's known for our outdoor activities. I grew up here. It's one of the things that I love. So I didn't move here for outdoor activities, but it's one of the things that I enjoyed greatly before having a disability. And since then, it's one of the things that I don't get to enjoy very much at this point. So some of that's just policies on making sure that we can even get to the door, get to the trail, some of that stuff up front. And then how we do those things is really important. Like Jen pointed out, some of the devices that we use, it's not so much that we're taking the easy route by using a mechanized device or an e-bike or something like that. For me, those devices are no different than wearing a different pair of shoes. Like, am I going to use my boots for this trail? Am I going to take sandals out today? Like, these are devices that get me from point A to point B. So kind of normalizing those things or finding where I can go with those things so I can make sure that I enjoy the outdoors is really important.
And I'll tell you, it feels almost like you're channeling a bit of the legislative sponsor, David Ortiz, who I'll share some of his thoughts, but he hits on a lot of these same notes as an active athlete. Madison, to you, and then Christina, what does it look like when we get this right? What's changed, and what does Colorado look like for athletes and all people in Colorado and all those who wish they were in Colorado?
Barrick, that's great that you said that because that's kind of where I want to go with this. Is at the end of this, I would love for us to be able to present this shared vision, right? Based on we have lived experience, we have best practices, but it's around making Colorado, right, #1 in accessible outdoor recreation. And just coming together like from the legislative standpoint and me representing government agencies, right? What can we do to put these systems and policies in place for access? And this kind of goes to what John said. And it's laying this groundwork for policy and also that this is good business, right? Like bringing businesses to the table, this benefits everyone. And this is something that I think if we can collect, again, that shared vision of we are #1 in this to share with other states, right? I think that would set us up very well.
Go to Christina and then Kurt.
Yeah, thanks. I'm going to echo what all of you all are saying. This is such a wonderful conversation to be a part of. I think I really want to bounce off of what John was saying too, just in shifting perceptions. I think that's such a hard job. It's an uphill battle for anyone who works in the disability rights space, whether you're in policy or advocacy or what have you, right? Shifting the perception of what a disabled person looks like, acts like, how they're interacting with your community, what accessibility looks like. And that accessibility goes so far and above what the law says, right? Like we always say that the ADA is the floor, it's not the ceiling, it's not inclusivity, it's just the bare bones. And so I think that my hope with this group is that we can shift that perception of, yes, we're going to put a policy in place, but also we want to be inclusive because every disabled person is different. Nobody's the same. It goes so far and above just a wheelchair, right? Like we have to be inclusive to the entire disability community. And that's really how I hope this group can work together. And I think specifically among stakeholders in the outdoor industry to shifting that perception, right? Like you talk to somebody in search and rescue about how they're interacting with the disability community versus a public, somebody who works in public lands versus a climbing instructor versus somebody on a ski hill. The perceptions are different and how people interact are different and what people know is different. And I think just getting people on the same page is really important for anything, especially policy work. So.
You may have started us on our list of folks we need to hear from, folks like the backcountry search and rescue director or folks in industry. So appreciate that. And that'll be part of our brainstorming. Kurt, your thoughts when we are on the dawn of our 150th as a state in 2 years. What has this group changed for people?
Well, I'd like to kind of tie back into what Madison said and tie it into the social model of disability. That social model that it's not the person and not, their disability that's a problem. It's more the attitudinal issues that come along with that. And then when that is erased, the economic part of it, the benefits that businesses will market to folks with disabilities. And I also have to throw in too that we really haven't talked about is there's a economic piece to those who can't afford to get to the mountains, transportation wise. I think there's a whole huge segment of the disabled community that never gets the opportunity because they can't afford, they don't have a $75,000 minivan. The transportation is very limited. So if you don't have money, you never get out of the city. And this comes from my experience, well, as a person with a disability, but also working with families with youth that have disabilities and from, low income neighborhoods and areas that kids, I worked with kids that the first time we took them up in a bus up to Winter Park, I had a little girl say, "Hey, are those real mountains?" And kids, we forget about that part of it. So I'd like to all those pieces. So that's where I'm at.
I appreciate it. And just for transparency, I wanted to have this conversation first to really start setting our North Star of what we're working toward. And you're going to sense and realize in these conversations, they're going to be kind of a roller coaster, because I wanted to set a North Star, and then I'm going to ask us what's wrong out there. And then I'm going to ask us about the challenges and the path forward. So there is going to be kind of that wandering line, but I want you to know it's intentional. I first wanted to set that North Star. The next conversation I want to have, and I'll tee it up, I'm going to start at the top, which means Christina, I'm going to go to you, and then Madison. This one, and Christina, you hit on the word perceptions. And what I want to hear from folks, what are the misperceptions out there? What are either the misperceptions from whether it's industry and rec providers or folks in the community or the general public? What's been you think are the misperceptions we need to overcome about what the current state of things is? Or what is the misperception people have about one group or another? And I'll just give as an example, we heard in our rewrite subcommittee, people saying, well, I think the misperception is that business doesn't want to help. Or we had other people saying, well, I think this community is asking for something special. Maybe it's about what reality actually exists. So I'd love to hear from your perspective, whether it's around the persons with disabilities, the general public, or those providing outdoor recreation opportunities. What are people getting wrong?
That's a big question, but I will try. Yeah, I think speaking from my role in nonprofit outdoor rec and just growing up around in that world, in the accessible outdoor rec world, I think the misperception of just like, oh, there's not that many people with disabilities out here, like it's fine. I think shifting that narrative and going back to changing perceptions of disability is normal. It's very common. So many people in this country are disabled. They're going to be out on the trails. Like shifting that narrative, I think is a big one. That's the first thing that came to mind. And then kind of putting on my hat as an ADA specialist, one of the biggest uphill battles that I face in work is people are like, making something accessible is really expensive. And then that is like the number one barrier. People just don't want to do it because they're like, too much money. And in reality, it just takes a little creativity. So I think that that's maybe my perception number two that I would change. So
I appreciate that. I'm going to Madison and then Sharon and Christina. I just want to mention when you talk about the different disabilities, one thing we've heard repeatedly from the task force that I want to bring to this is the conversation about those with an clearly visible disability and those with invisible or less seen disabilities. But Madison and then Sharon, what are the misperceptions out there?
Christina, as I was writing things down, you said exactly what I was going to say. So that's great, but it's cost prohibitive, right? I think there's a huge perception from both the business side, and I would say even from a government side, right? And so the other thing for my number two is I think there's a misperception that government needs to stay out of this, right? Like you're going to give us recommendations, but whatever, we don't need to like follow those. And so I think breaking that perception of having this task force, right, and putting these policies and recommendations in place and laying the groundwork is something that this group collectively we're going to have to push forward to overcome.
Thanks, Madison. Sharon and then John.
I think some of the things that Christina said earlier were pretty spot on. There are a lot of, I guess, people's understandings of disabilities aren't quite always the same. I think a lot of times people think it's like this small group of people, and it's really not. Sometimes our idea that it has to be someone specifically in a wheelchair, and the idea of the picture isn't always correct. There's a lot of different ways that people present disabilities, but also the thing that I like to think about too is sometimes it's not always about these chronic long-term disabilities. There's a lot of people that they might break a leg. Melanie had shared earlier that she had injured her shoulder. I mean, at some point in time, we're going to have a family member or know someone that's going to be limited in some way. It's not just our small group, it's a large population of people. And at some point, when we're limited, we're going to care and we're going to understand. I mean, any one of us, if we roll an ankle today or hurt our knee today, we will be using a wheelchair leaving the hospital today. That's not a person living with a disability, that's all of us. And so we have to find ways to make these kind of shared spaces available to our family members, our friends, ourselves, the aging population, because at some point in time, one of us will need it.
Really appreciate those points, Sharon. I'm gonna go to John and then Kurt.
Yeah, I think Christina hit the nail on the head. I want to add something to what she said. As an example, last July, I went up Quandary Peak. If anybody knows Quandary, they'll know that it's a very rocky trail above tree line. And I have difficulty walking that with a similarly to CP, but I don't have CP. But I was the only person on the trail who had that kind of difficulty, and I think that I believe that one of the bigger objectives of this group will be to change the perception of who is disabled, what counts as someone who might have an obvious disability, but who is obviously more capable than what others might think of as being. And I would put myself in that category. Nobody thought that I would be able to walk or anything like that. And like, I strongly believe that people like me need a level opportunity to accomplish their goals in the outdoors, just as anybody else does. And changing perceptions will go a long way towards making that a reality.
Thank you, John. I appreciate that. I'm going to go up to Kurt in just 1 second. And I think, John, you highlight something I think really important. So I want to pause on that. And that is people's perception of who is someone with a disability. And we have the Rewrite Subcommittee, which is looking at a legal definition. And they're looking at how does the ADA define it? How does Colorado define it? But I think you highlight it. It's one thing to have a legal definition. It's another thing to have a public perception. So I'm going to be looking forward to digging in with all of you on how we approach both of those issues. But I'm going to go to Kurt and then Melanie with what are the misperceptions on any sides of these conversations or in our communities?
This is Kurt again. Gosh, everybody said so many great things. I think one of them is it's always, it's those people over there, that we don't think about. A lot of folks don't think about disability as us, it's always those people over there. It's their problem, as opposed to, hey, I'm enabling a family member. I might be denying myself an opportunity to meet somebody who's going to make a difference in my life. That piece of it's kind of hard to explain. But once you bring everybody to the table and let us be a fully integrated community, then the opportunities just open up so much. Things that would benefit outdoors Colorado in general. You don't know who you're going to inspire to be the next, outdoor recreation specialist. It's going to create some wonderful thing. And then the other piece to it, we really haven't talked about it. We have an aging population too, that nobody really addresses. All of us hopefully are going to get older someday. I've gotten older, and I have additional, mobility issues related to that. But that piece of it, I think, is really powerful too.
Thank you, Kurt. I'm going to go to Melanie, and then Connor, and then Jen. Melanie, you're in a unique position in this group. You're one of the few on this committee representing industry, and I won't pin you to only that role because you've got a life of experience. But I'm curious, as a member of industry, are there misperceptions that come to mind for you?
Yes. Thank you for that, Barrick. And it's great listening to just the varied perspectives on the group. I think from the perspective of resorts as well as other providers of recreation opportunities, I think there's a misperception that providers don't want to be as inclusive as they possibly can be. And I would also say on the part of providers, there's a perception or a fear of getting it wrong and being sued. There's a lot of litigation in this space, and it's probably one of the things that the subcommittee will hear me talk about a lot is we need our recommendations to be clear. We want our consensus and our expectations to be clear because that's going to help providers provide what we want them to provide. And so those would be two things that I think are either perceptions or misperceptions on the part of recreation providers that it's important to be conscious of.
Thank you, Melanie. Jen, and then Connor. What are people not understanding correctly, or what misperceptions are out there in your experience?
I apologize, I missed a big portion of those comments, so I hope I'm on track with my comment here. The perceptions that providers feel that they're missing or things are different, I think from our experiences that providers often still think that a person with a disability, whether it be IDD or whether it be a physical, that the person that's participating can't have the full experience and that somehow it needs to be watered down. And there may be adaptations, that's not the right word this morning, but adaptations that need to be made, but it doesn't have to be a less than experience. Like John was talking, he skis black diamonds, but I don't know if this is the right place to say this, but I think that training for providers is very limited and it's often a volunteer basis. So that's kind of puts people in a difficult position sometimes. And so I think training maybe in some providers needs to be part of their operating expenses, and as well as funding that a lot of providers don't have to go out and find volunteers and grants to find their equipment, that providers have that in their bottom line, that's just part of what they do.
Thank you, Jen. Connor, your thoughts on misperceptions when it comes to individuals with disabilities accessing recreation, or the providers and the industry partners?
Yeah, thank you, Barrick. Well, I think it's been well said and well covered by my colleagues. It's the joy of going last, but I will just lift up a couple points that I heard that I just strongly agree with. Obviously, I think it's been well covered that this is such a bigger population than I think is commonly reflected and we've certainly found that in the work we've done, for example, with the Colorado Equity Fund. And then Christina also mentioned something that I think is important, and it's this perception that I hear sometimes in industry that this is just cost prohibitive. And, to be sure, sometimes, there is a high cost to doing this, but there's also, in many cases, a business sense. And I think there are also a lot of different things we can do to reshape perception, to, provide equipment that are a whole lot less costly than I think many people in the industry realize. And then also I want to lift up what Melanie said. I mean, I kind of sit on both sides of this a little bit. We a lot of work with industry, obviously, and represent the industry. And there is, to reiterate her point, there is a lot of fear. I hear that come up a lot. The fear of litigation, of doing it wrong, of not quite knowing where to start. And so I think if there's anything we can do as a group to help, reshape that or better inform the reality there, or change laws so that, the laws are better suited for both protection, but also for better access, that will go a long way.
Thank you, Connor. I'm going to switch it up a little bit. And Melanie, you had kind of teed this up for me. I'm going to come to you second. Jen, I'm going to preview. I'm going to come to you first. There's a lot of challenges we're going to need to overcome. Some of them are going to be the easier ones, or maybe at least to us, they seem easy. And it may be that as we think about the easy ones, some of them aren't so easy, and the tough ones we may find are actually a little easier than we thought. But I want to start teasing out those kind of big two tiers, understanding it's not so simple as there's only two categories. But I want to think about what are maybe some of the simple, straightforward things to change. And when I say simple and straightforward, I'm going to live in a world of unicorns and rainbows where I set aside money and people's prejudice or behaviors and really just focus on the action that needs to change. And so I want to talk first about what do seem to be some of the more basic things that, hey, if we just did this, it would make a huge difference. And before we go there, I'm going to come back to our purpose and the report that we're going to write. We are going to be identifying barriers to basic access to and enjoyment of the Colorado outdoors for persons with disabilities. And we're going to submit a report on recommendations on best practices and guidance to creating that basic access. So I'm going to go to Jen and then Melanie with what seem to be some of the more basic ones. And as I ask you to answer, I'm going to apologize. I have to go off camera because a power cord came undone. I need to plug back in. But Jen, to you first and then to Melanie.
Thank you, Barrick, for that large question. I think for me, I'm coming at this somewhat from a mobility standpoint, because that's where my lived experience with my daughter is. And I think access, and we've talked about this just a little bit here too, means physical access a lot of times, just getting to where they need to be. And like a couple of the ski areas that Cody loves to ski at, once we get on the mountain, things are pretty good. But getting to the mountain from the parking lot is not so easy. And again, as Kurt was talking about, getting people to those areas is something that I've just become a lot more aware of it all. I've been working with CASTA with the transportation and learning what really options are available for Coloradoans with disabilities to get to different places. But then I think about trails also, and even in like interpretive displays that are on trails. Could we put in some kind of a voice recording that people with blind or low vision would be able to access? Could we put in Braille on these interpretive displays or at trailheads or at ski areas that just make everyday access easier for everybody? But even on the elevators, is there some way that they can make things easier to get to the ski slope for instance, not putting the trash can in front of the buttons to get to the elevator. Just little things like that can make a huge difference. And I know those are, they seem kind of minute, but they can lead to a better experience, whether it's on a trailhead or in a ski chalet or something like that. So those are just the few thoughts off the top of my head.
I appreciate that, Jen. And I think you make some important points in there, that there are those things that we may need the hand of government to tell people to change. There are also some recommendations this group may be able to put forward that are a little more common sense, like, hey, move that trash can. And it'll be up to this group to decide what is something that we're going to recommend the power of legislation or rules or regulations, and where you're going to make recommendations to the industry providers. I'm going to go to Melanie and John. I also probably should have, before I started this, channeled Mr. Ortiz, Representative Ortiz, who not only sponsored the bill that created this as an adaptive athlete himself, and I know he wished he could have been on this call, and he'll join some future ones, but he's shared a lot of ideas that I want to share with this group in out of respect to him. He's made the comment that it's one thing to put those posts at a trailhead 30 inches apart, but his adaptive bike needs 38 inches. Or when he goes to put his kayak in at a river and he can't access a place to drop off, or similarly when he goes skiing and they've got reserved parking, but somebody with an adaptive athlete doesn't have a place to drop off their equipment securely. So I'm not advocating for any of these, but Representative Ortiz has been such a passionate advocate in general, and particularly for this task force, that I wanted to channel his thoughts a little bit. I'm going to go to Melanie and then John with this question of, what do you see as some of the low-hanging fruit, as you said, Melanie? What may be some things that hopefully aren't as controversial that this group might be able to put forward some recommendations around?
This is one where I've got an idea, but I also feel like it's so early in the process. I want to hear more before I have really, I'm sure we as an industry have all sorts of blind spots in terms of what is the low-hanging fruit. It might be a best practice for providers of outdoor recreation to conduct a regular audit with members of their disability community in a sort of non-legalistic, non-threatening kind of environment, but just have that be part of something that they do on a regular basis in order to hear things like, don't put your trash cans here, or, can we have a secure spot to drop off equipment? Or it's going to be different from one provider to the next. I don't know that there's going to be a universal set of specific recommendations, but it sounds like that might be a super easy first step to expand communication between providers and users of the recreation opportunity, facility, whatever it happens to be, and just generate some easy wins, because recreation providers just aren't thinking as broadly as they could be thinking.
I appreciate that, Melanie. I'm going to go to John and then Sharon. And I think, Melanie, in your comments, you highlight there are so many different levers of change. And for today's conversation, and probably the next few, I don't want us to focus on how are we going to drive that change. Is it legislation? Is it rulemaking? Is it grants? Is it calling on industry to communicate better? Is it calling for coalitions? I really want to focus on what is it that we need to change. But I want us to always have in mind there are going to be a dozen levers of change that we'll explore. But John and then Sharon, I'm curious your thoughts on what are the obvious things? Hey, if we just change this, it would really move the dial, and this shouldn't be that hard.
Well, I'd like to start off by saying, reminding the group that it's not just private industry that's affected by this. The largest provider of outdoor recreation is actually the state government of Colorado. So we should remember that this isn't going to be a private industry thing. It's not going to be a retail private industry what to do. It's going to be about collaborating among ourselves to care about this issue. What parameters we want to set in place about how we want to provide access to those disabilities to the outdoors. And on that front, low-hanging fruit, I would categorize it as more ambitious, but it is pretty obvious. Therefore, I would consider it to be low-hanging fruit. Adding transportation sources for people who may not be able to drive for whatever reason themselves. It's very cost prohibitive to have the only way to get up to the mountain be either a 6-hour train ride or a $300 Uber ride up and down. It's just not practical. So on that front, we need to, I strongly believe that we need to talk about adding bus stops, adding certain routes to the normal RTD system, adding new mechanisms by which people can get around. That to me is definitely more ambitious, but it's also so obvious that it needs to be done right away. Another thing that I would recommend at this stage is adding different signposts for those who might be directionally challenged on the trail. Is easy to get lost, and I've noticed that for some of the more remote locations, the trails are very poorly marked, leaving someone with less adaptability to the outdoors at a disadvantage, especially if they're going with like 1 or 2 people into the wilderness. That can be a challenge for anybody, really, but really it's particularly acute for those with disabilities. So those are 2 of the sort of obvious deficits that I believe we can change.
Thank you, John. Let's go to Sharon, and then Kurt, and then Christina.
Yeah, I think some of the easy things are still just getting to the door, getting to the trailhead. I mean, a lot of it is stuff we already have in place for, big events, whether it's parking, access, getting, from point A to point B. I think what you brought up earlier from Senator Ortiz about having a place to put equipment would be really useful. If we're trying to go, just using skiing as an example, trying to actually get to the first ski lift, finding somewhere to put a chair, finding somewhere to drop off stuff, finding parking. I mean, for me personally, getting from the parking lot to the hill or to the mountains going to be a significant event in my day. Just thinking about how long is it going to take me? Where's the nearest bathroom? Where can I drop my stuff off? This doesn't even have anything to do with skiing on the mountain. It's just some of the normal access stuff that we already have in place other places. So I think some of those are really important. And, as much as I would like to, to go for really big things, we have to remember too, some of these things are going to be people's first opportunity, or, it's just access. Not every person with a disability is going to be skiing, black diamonds when we get up there. John's incredible for being able to find ways to make that happen. It's just having the opportunity to try having the opportunity to fail or having the opportunity to fall in love with it and continue to do it. And so if we can kind of figure out those things and just get people there doing it, that's the most important part. And Melanie, your suggestion of just having someone around to kind of help, is definitely great. If you ever want me to struggle around the mountain all day and just see where some of these pain points are, like I think that's a good recommendation where it's, not trying to break down or call people out or do anything else. But I mean, just spending the day with, someone that has a disability, like when you're having to, see where I need a wheelchair lifted or seeing where I'm struggling, my struggles start to become your struggles because you're going to have to be patient with me through those things. And, it becomes pretty obvious pretty quickly.
Thank you, Sharon. And I love the spirit of collaboration that's already here. Kurt and then Christina, when you think about hey, it's obvious. If we just do these little things, we can make a big difference.
This is Kurt. I think one of them, somebody touched on it earlier, state employees, addressing the ableism issue with state employees, creating that culture of that this is just part of what we do every day. So whether that's trainings, I know Atlantis, we've done several lately that I've really, I think they had a big impact. A disability language, etiquette, we call it /pride, some kind of training for state employees where you would start out with on that, including, Division of Wildlife, parks staff, all of that, a lot of it's, if you don't know, you don't know. And it's just always pleasantly surprising when I've done the trainings, how people respond to that and the ideas that come from that. And I think that's something that could be fairly simple to do, that once you've planted that seed, that ideas come. Being a former city employee, I know state employees want to do the right thing, and if you don't know, you don't know, So I think some type of, I don't know if it'd be media. I'm a little hesitant on the requiring somebody to sit at their workstation and watch a video. It's very effective, but just some kind of training related to that against ableism.
Thanks, Kurt. I'm going to go to Christina, and then Jen, I see your hand up, so I'll come to you right after Christina.
Yeah, I want to bounce off of what Sharon was saying of, just because you have a seat at the table, or you're given a seat at the table, doesn't mean the table's accessible, right? Doesn't mean you can get there. And I think that's a huge direction that we can shift. As when I go out and do ADA inspections for public accommodations, I look for 4 things. I look, can somebody park? Can somebody get around? Can somebody use the bathroom? And can somebody understand what's going on, right? Is there signage? Is there effective communication? Can they understand what is going on here? And I think we don't treat public lands as public accommodations. We don't have those 4 things. Any state park I roll up to, I can't tick all 4 boxes. And I think that that's a big needle that we can push the other direction. So.
Thanks, Christina. Jen.
Christina, that's a very valid point. That's excellent. And that kind of is what I'm just wanted to interject here, that I just saw a Forest Service video lately about accessibility, so there is some collaboration that's going on there that they are working on. So I just wanted to share that.
Thank you, Jen. We are getting down to the last 15 minutes of our time together. I want to remind, if there's any members of the public, and I think we just have one person online, if you would like to offer some thoughts, I'll call on you in just about 5 minutes. I see your hand up. We'll get to some public comment in 5 or 6 minutes. I also want to recognize, for those of you on the committee seeing new names popping up on screen, Mark is the Lieutenant Governor's Chief of Staff. He, along with Josh, are continuously supporting not just the Lieutenant Governor's broad portfolio of work, but particularly the work of this task force and committee, and they've taken a real personal interest. So you'll see their names, rarely their faces, maybe occasionally they'll jump on and say hello, but we will get to that. I'll call on Hani in just 1 minute. In the 5 minutes before that, what I want to do is a lightning round. And this is going to be very limited. We're going to pick this conversation up on our next meeting. but I would love in a one sentence or less, what's the big challenge? What's the one where we probably are going to knock heads, where we are going to say that's not possible, or somebody's going to tell us you can't do that, but we need to take that challenge on because it's crucial to getting this right. And in this case, I'm starting back up at the top, which means Kurt, then Christina, and then Sharon. Lightning round. What's the big thing where we're going to knock heads, but we're going to get it done anyway?
I would say that just right off really quick, being the first one, transportation, getting people to that there's so many different angles of that, you know, from affordability to practicality. So that's
Christina and then Sharon.
I was also going to say just price equity, right? Like economic equity amongst outdoor industries and policies and how we address that. So transportation was the first thing that came to mind in that bubble too. So.
Thanks. Sharon and then John.
Yeah, I guess something that would be cool that would kind of cover a lot of those is a access pass. A lot of these short lines, quick different things are more of like a luxury, but you know, we're not trying to take up the whole mountain. It's just getting access to the mountain.
John and then Melanie. What's the big thing that not everybody's going to agree on, but we're going to find a way to address it anyway?
That's not in land time and everybody's transportation is going to be a challenge for us because it involves a lot of fun.
Understood. Melanie and then John, and then I'll go to Connor. The bigger challenge that's going to be thornier, costlier, or more contentious, but this group's going to figure it out anyway. Where are we going to need to spend some real time learning and listening?
Well, I think when we go back to the term basic access, and just based on what I've heard here today, transportation, parking, that sort of getting to the outdoor recreation activity, whatever it is, feels like a really big piece of all this and a really big challenge and a really diverse challenge. And yet a really important one that we ought to take on.
Thank you, Melanie. And Jen, I know there's a lot going on there. Are you a place to jump in with some thoughts?
Yes, I think that changing the thought process that we're not asking for something special, that equity is just that it's for everybody and it will benefit everybody, whether they have a disability or not.
Thank you, Jen. Connor, do you have thoughts on one aspect or one issue that you think is going to be a little thornier, a little more complex, or is just going to take us learning and listening more to really navigate?
Yeah, well, I completely agree with what's come up, transportation, the perception. I'll just add, I think, kind of, I'd say funding and sorts of funding, where those funds come from. I think we have, in Colorado, from a state government side, we obviously have the Taxpayer Bill of Rights, which limits large scale investment. And I think to do what we want to do here, obviously, it will take some investment. I think there have been some amazing ideas thrown around on kind of the low hanging fruit, the audit, some of these transportation things. But I also know that some of this is going to take real funding, and I'm excited to explore different avenues to get there. But that'll be a big conversation.
Thanks, Connor. And I'm going to bring Hani in 2 minutes. I want to cover a couple of smaller administrative items with everybody while we've got a few more minutes. One ask of everybody. We obviously have a diverse group on this screen, nowhere near as broad and diverse as the state. And that's not a reflection on the selection. It's just a reality. Somebody once said, if you've met one person with a disability, you've met exactly one person with a disability. You haven't met a community. And so part of our ask for all of you is, who else do we need to talk to? In the year ahead, we're going to identify a lot of opportunities for additional stakeholder involvement. And whether that's additional adaptive athletes, whether that's additional family members, whether that's friends, whether that's providers of outdoor recreation, industry, or others, I'm going to ask you to think between now and our next meeting, about some constituencies, some groups, or some opportunities, and where we can go to where they are instead of making it inconvenient for them to come to us to go get some additional opinions and input as we do our work. I don't have a specific ask or question for anybody just yet, but we are committed to making sure we get as diverse and broad of input as possible. So I'm going to ask you all to think about that. You're welcome to drop Carrie or me emails between now and then, but know that that is considered a piece of homework we're going to assign, and we will be quizzing on that when we get back together. My other question is, we got together awfully early today. And while I'm a morning person who starts my day around 3 or 3:30, I know this is early for a lot of people, and we want to just do a pulse check with everybody. Does this time generally work? I'll tell you, we chose this based on the polling that Carrie put together, but either by a nod, a visible hand, or an emoticon in there, do people feel good about meeting at 7:30 as a general time, as long as you've got plenty of advance notice? I'm seeing some maybes, some thumbs up. Mostly some skeptical eyebrows, I think I'm seeing as well. I'll tolerate this, but I prefer. We will follow up with everybody to see what times do feel right. We did this because it was important to us that we get the subcommittee together this month, and I know this month in particular gets a little crazy. So we'll follow up with you on all of that, and I appreciate all of you, at least this once, getting up early with us. With that, I want to invite Hani to address the group if there's anything you'd like to offer.
Yeah, thank you so much. I'm Hani Rayleigh. I'm the executive director of the Arc of Aurora, and just wanted to commend and compliment this fine group of folks invested in accessibility for people with disabilities in Colorado. Would just urge you to also consider individuals with intellectual and developmental disabilities. So often, folks with IDD are missing from disability-based conversations and inclusivity discussions. And so looking at opportunities to also fold individuals with intellectual disabilities in, and looking at plain language guides for whatever is built. Effective communication looks really different for a lot of people with accessibility needs who have intellectual disabilities. And if there's anything that the ARC network can do to provide any support or recommendations, we would be happy to do so. But also wanted to just elevate and highlight how much I appreciate so much of the conversation really revolving around what we consider the curb cut effect, right? The ADA built in curb cuts, but in fact, it improved everyone's lives. And so the continuing to ground the subcommittee's work in making it accessible for people with disabilities, but also improving everyday users, I think is going to go a long way. I appreciate your work and look forward to continuing to follow what you do.
Thank you very much, Hani, and we appreciate you joining us. And as everybody, I appreciate you joining us at this hour of the day and listening in. I'm looking at my notes that I'm trying to take, as well as my colleague flagging me. Sharon, did I skip over you on the big idea or the big challenge? Because I don't have a note, but maybe my colleague does.
I don't recall, sorry.
Is there anything that you would say is a significant challenge or contentious issue that you think is going to take us really some complex conversations or learning to be able to dig into?
Oh, I think I did respond to it. It was some of the access, the parking, different things like that. I recommended almost like an access type pass, maybe putting them out in once or twice, limited things. I think we usually have to pay for them as luxuries, and for us, it's just trying to get there.
I appreciate that, and I appreciate your tolerance of me. I've got 3 screens going, trying to make sure that I'm keeping track of everybody while boxes move around on my monitor. We've got about 5 minutes, and one of the things you're going to find that I do with a lot of these meetings is just check in with people at the start and the end of each meeting. We started today really just by getting to know each other, but I always like, as a facilitator, to understand where people are coming into a conversation at the start. And both as we logged on and as I got messages from folks, I heard people saying everything from, I'm a little nervous, I'm a little overwhelmed, to I'm antsy to get going. I'd love to hear from folks in 2 to 3 words. As you're wrapping up this conversation, having met a lot of folks for the first time maybe, and had this conversation, just a quick lightning round about how you're feeling about the conversation and where this work is headed. And I'm going to go in a reverse order, which means Jen, and then Melanie, and then John.
I am all of the above, and I am so excited to be a part of this and definitely honored. And John, Louis Benitez told me to tell you hello. So thank you for this opportunity.
Thank you. Melanie, and then John, and then Sharon. How are you feeling as we end this call today?
I'm excited about talking about the challenges that we have in front of us. I think the group is great and would love, as facilitators, Barrick and Carrie, at some point during our work, would really love to be able to get together in person with everyone.
We will see what we can pitch the state on doing. I always love that. It's been a new world. COVID forced us online, and then everybody said, let's just stay there. I like being in rooms with people. We'll see what we can do. John, and then Sharon, how are you feeling as we wrap up today?
Yeah, I fully agree with Melanie, and I'm very encouraged by the group of stakeholders that have been brought together. We bring so such a robust knowledge base of different perspectives and experiences, but I really excited about where we're going here. One little encouragement that I would make going forward is if there's any research or public policy details that the state government can provide to us, that'll help enrich our discussion, I think that'd be very helpful. To jumpstart the conversation. If others agree, then that's great. But if others have a different view, then so what? It's a suggestion.
John, you're reading my mind, and when we close out, I'm going to disclose to everybody that today was the easy day. From there, we start pushing it a little harder. Sharon, and then Christina.
I'm feeling good wrapping up today. I've been sick the last couple of days, and everything's kind of clearing out, and I'm feeling better. So, a good conversation is good for the soul, and I think there's a lot of possibilities to move this forward. The only worries I have are more personal. We're a smaller group speaking, for a very large, diverse group, and so it's a challenge to get it right, and that pressure's on all of us. And we're gonna do the best we can.
Thanks, Sharon. Christina, and then Kurt.
Yeah, kind of echoing off of Sharon again, there's, a slight anxiety of, I hope we get this right. We're guinea pigs to this task force, so we're doing it for the first time. So there's a lot of pressure on us, but I'm really excited. I think as somebody who's worked in outdoor rec for a long time and somebody who's worked in the disability side of the government for a long time, I'm usually the one person in each room saying, like, you got to do this. And it's great to be in a room full of people who are also yelling that. So I'm just really excited.
Thanks, Christina. Kurt, your thoughts as we wrap up.
This is Kurt. I agree with Christina. It's nice to be in a room with everybody that's fairly on the same page. I was a little worried. I didn't know if I would be bringing the right issues, but there are so many common issues here that I feel that we all can work towards solving. And I'm excited. I'm not really overly worried anymore. I was a little little anxiety at the beginning. So thank you to everybody.
Thank you, Kurt. Thank you, everybody. And it's only half joking. It's going to get tougher going forward. Today, we really did want to kind of ground ourselves in the work ahead and let this team get to know one another. John, we will be sending some free reading, some homework where it will be helpful. I also recognize you all are volunteering your time and have full-time lives outside of this, so I want to minimize that burden. But there are going to be times where to make our time together as productive as possible, we'll ask you to do some free reading. We're also going to lean on all of you to tell us what you need to learn, who you'd like to hear from. And the conversations are going to get tougher. I'm confident that we're going to find some powerful recommendations because of this group gathered and the people that you're connected to. But I'm also ready for some of the difficult conversations where we see the easy and obvious one that somebody says is too expensive, or we see the one that may fit one group and we need to identify ways to address what works for all Coloradans. So it's going to get a little tougher going forward, but I'm glad we have this group to make it happen. We will follow up by email about plans for our next meeting. Whatever holidays you are celebrating in the coming weeks, we wish you all of the very best. We appreciate your time, and we will see you soon on our next call. Thank you all very much.
Thank you for your facilitation.